Chapter 5. Auntie. One soft grey September afternoon, nearly 3 months after baby's first birthday, Dorothy was watching for her brother's return home with more than usual impatience. From the clock to the window she went, and then back to the clock again, a dozen times in about as many minutes, sometimes varying the performance by going out into the porch, though rather less of the road was visible thence than from the window. And once, though a fine straight rain was falling, she ran down to the gate, and stood bareheaded gazing towards town, until Mrs. Hopkins called her in. "Don't you think he's late, nurse?" she said. "I thought he would be earlier because the rain would make him ride." "Perhaps somebody has come in and hindered him," suggested Mrs. Hopkins, who was putting a few finishing touches to the tea table with baby in her arm. "Oh dear, I do wish he'd come," sighed Dorothy presently. "Shall I give him 3 guesses, nurse, to find out what nice thing has happened since the morning? I wonder if he'd think of it. Perhaps he would if I said it was something about baby. Oh, you lovey-dovey pet." This was with a sudden rush at Master Carstairs, as nurse paused near the window where she stood. Little Theodore, at 15 months old, was indeed such a baby as could not fail to win the heart of any girl. Plump and dimpled, but not too fat, with the sweetest of faces tinted about as much as a wild rose, large intelligent brown eyes, with darker brows and lashes, a perfect little nose, and a half-open bud of a mouth, just showing 4 pearly little teeth. His hair was straight, like his mother's, but as Dottie's own was wavy, she did not care so very much for curls, and it was not ugly straight, she was careful to assure people. As for his disposition, he was the dearest, most loving, and best-tempered baby that could possibly be, and so generous too, the pet. He would never eat a sweetie or a cake until he had got everybody in the room to take a bite, and he never cried when he was washed. He liked it, and would often kiss nurse's arm when she was sponging him. Aunt Dorothy was quite sure that there could not be another such a dear, sweet, pretty baby in all the world. While she was caressing him, the jingle of a tram-car bell became audible in the distance. "There he is! There he is!" she cried, darting to the door. "You won't tell, will you, nurse? You will let me?" "Oh, I won't tell," promised Mrs. Hopkins, smiling good-naturedly, yet as though she thought that a great deal of fuss was being made about nothing. "I won't say a word." Down the garden path danced Dorothy, heedless of the rain, for Everard had really come, and his hand was on the gate. "Everard! Everard!" she cried, seizing his arm and skipping backwards with him to the house. "What do you think? Baby can run alone!" If baby had beaten the champion walker, or suddenly acquired the art of flying in the air, Dottie's radiant face could not have expressed more marvelling joy. "He ran right across the room," she continued, "from the sideboard to your table. He did it twice. I did wish you could have seen him." "We shall have to put him into knickerbockers after this, Dorothy," said Everard, taking his laughing boy from Mrs. Hopkins' arms as soon as he entered the parlour. "Oh no, not yet, please don't," cried Dotty. "He looks so pretty in his frocks." "I didn't say how soon after, you know," returned her brother. "Now then, let's put the mannikin through his steps." He set the mite down on the floor, while Dotty pranced excitedly to the other side of the room, and stooping, held out her hands. Then, dimpling with delight at his own cleverness, baby trotted across to her on his 2 little feet, sitting down unexpectedly, however, when within 6 inches of the goal. But he was used to sudden sitting downs, and didn't mind it in the least. "Didn't he do it sweetly? Oh, you darling!" exclaimed the little aunt, and seizing the bonny boy, she tossed him higher than her head. Don't, Dotty, put him down. Never do that again." Everard's voice was almost sharp, and Dorothy, looking at him in surprise, saw that he had turned quite pale. "But baby likes it," she said. "He's not a bit frightened." "No, dear, but I am," replied her brother. "He's much too heavy for you to lift like that, and besides, he is so strong now. If he gave a leap out of your arms, you would not have the power to save him from pitching over your shoulder. And if he fell on his head, think how dreadful it might be." Dotty became grave at this terrible suggestion, and very quietly sat baby on her lap. She resolved that since it was fraught with so much danger, she would never toss him again. But she had no idea how difficult it would be to keep from doing so. It seemed to come so naturally. Perhaps from seeing her brother often do it while baby shrieked with delight, but the strength of a man was incomparably greater than the 10-year-old girl. Everard could hold baby aloft upon one hand. He called it making a flying cherub of him. The little one, however, knew of no difference between them, and would jump himself for Dotty to throw him up, until she hardly knew how to refuse. It was a practice, too, that she personally enjoyed. It made her feel grown up and aunt-like and important. Once again, that same evening, she found herself almost giving him a toss. Everard was out of the room, but Mrs. Hopkins's guardian eye was on the pair. "His pa said you were not to do that, Miss Dotty," she said. "I knew a child myself that had convulsions brought on through that very thing, pitching out of the nurse girl's arms onto his head, and in 12 hours it was dead." So the second warning was even more impressive than the first, and Dotty said to herself that she really would mind. When once he had started walking, baby improved apace. His uncertain steps grew firmer every day, and he flopped down less often. Before another month had passed, he was running all about the house and garden, and they had great difficulty in keeping him from trying to climb the stairs. "I wish I could get him to say Auntie," observed Dorothy one day. "He tried to say ... but I want him to call me Auntie." Baby was by this time making great progress in conversational power, as well as pedestrianism, inasmuch as he could say "Fa" for father, and "Pop" for Mrs. Hopkins, and "Baya" for bread and butter. Alice the servant, for reasons best known to himself, he persisted in addressing as Jubba. "You must call yourself Auntie to him," Everard said. "Whatever you say, he will try to say the same, and whatever you do he will imitate. His mind now is like a little looking-glass, reflecting everything that goes on around. Only we must remember this, that, unlike a glass, it will retain perhaps for years, or even for life, many of the impressions now made. That is why you want us all to be so careful what we say and do before him, isn't it?" said Dotty, bending over the cherub as he lay asleep on the couch with an almost reverent air. "He is so good now, isn't he? Like a little angel from heaven. It would be dreadful if anyone were to teach him anything wrong." After that she made a point of saying "Come to Auntie," or "Auntie will do," this or that, in the fond hope that baby's tiny lips would learn to frame the longed-for word. One golden Saturday afternoon in October, Dotty was sitting at the table busily engaging in fringing out a marker to put in her new geography book. All the girls made them, it being the fashion at her school just then, and bits of coloured silk and ribbon were in great request. Someone had given her a lovely piece of shot silk with shades like mother of pearl, and she was very anxious to finish it, to see how the pink fringe going one way and the pale green the other would look. Nevertheless, when Mrs. Hopkins brought baby into the room, saying, "Miss Dotty, I wish you would amuse him out of doors a little while," she immediately swept her half-made marker and her silk ravellings into a book for safety, and held out her arms. "Come ta-ta with Auntie," she said, and baby echoed "ta-ta," and dimpled with glee. This was no effort for Dorothy. It was no struggle to put away her pleasant work, as it might have been to some girls who wanted to be obedient and kind. She loved baby so much that to do anything for him was her greatest joy. There is nothing like love to make easy even the hardest and most disagreeable duties in the world. At the back of the house was a lawn with flower beds in it, not grey and scentless geraniums and calceolarias, but roses, crimson, pink and creamy purple velvet pansies, and fringe-tufted pinks. Beyond this grass plot, between it and the tangle of currant and gooseberry bushes that came next, was Dorothy's delight, a real fountain. A round shallow stone basin was let into the ground, and from the centre of it rose a picturesque pile of rockwork, embellished here and there with pearly shells. From the summit of this rockwork shot up a slender jet of water, that falling back kept damp and green the lovely little ferns and mosses that Everard and Miriam had in times past found in their country walks, and planted in the crevices of the shells and stones. In the cool dark pool below one might see some tiny fish darting about. They ought to have been goldfish, of course, but truth compels me to confess that they were only tittlebats. bought by the garden boy in a bottle one day. They were just as happy, however, as if they had worn coats of the reddest gold, and on the whole I think they made Dotty as happy too. It was charming to have a fountain like that in the middle of one's garden. Most of my readers will agree, and yet, had the fountain not been there, it is possible that Dorothy would have been spared many, many tears, and that this story might not have been written. Out into that sunny place they wandered, Dotty leading Baby by the hand, past the lawn and the fountain and the wilderness of currant bushes, to the orchard beyond, where the rich autumn sunshine came glittering on the mossy green trunks of the trees, and rosy apples gleamed among the leaves above, or peeped from the cosy nests that had found for themselves in the long grass underfoot. Baby soon discovered a nice round apple to play at ball with, and was very happy rolling and running after it for some time. Suddenly an idea seemed to strike him. He came quickly and straight to Dorothy, holding up his two little arms and trying to jump. "Up, up!" he said. Dorothy remembered the warning she had received, and her own resolution danced him a little on the ground, and even lifted him till his head was as high as her chest. But that was not what Master Baby meant. "Up, up!" he reiterated, throwing his arms still higher. "Up, Auntie, up!" The rogue! Did he guess the magic of that word? This was the first time he had uttered it, and Dotty was filled with delight. How could she refuse him after that? Perhaps if he were not encouraged, he would never say the word again. She would give him just one little toss, not a high one, and then perhaps he would be content. But alas for them both! Baby was stronger than ever before, and he was excited with having gained his desire. Shrieking with delight, he gave a spring, just as Dorothy's childish arms were at their fullest strain. He slipped beyond her control. She tried in vain to save him, and the next moment there was a dull thud upon the grass, a low cry, and all was still.